Final Fantasy XV has been widely accepted as a welcome entry into the venerable brand, which isn't saying much because the last few entries, barring one relaunch, are some of the worst games to carry the Final Fantasy name.
We're going home together!
While I do agree with this sentiment and wouldn't mind another entry that utilises a more complex version of 15's combat, I think it's a flawed game, containing all the telltale marks of being improperly tested. After enjoying my time in the game's giant hub world, hunting monsters, completing side quests, and finding myself getting invested in the story, I entered the last quarter of the game expecting a satisfying conclusion. Unfortunately, I completed the game in a lukewarm mood, and the sole reason for this was because of the entirety of Chapter 13. It's now pretty infamous to the point that the game's director has pledged to improve the experience through patches. It's a very admiring commitment from the developers, but I think everyone is misunderstanding precisely why this chapter does not work at all. In this video, I aim to unravel exactly what is wrong with this game, and speculate what Square could have done to make it right. I hope the patches fix the problems many others and I have with this chapter, because it's left a bad taste in our mouths that lasted the rest of the game. While I imagine a lot of people watching this video are doing so after playing the game, there are also people watching this who either don't plan to play this game and don't mind spoilers, and others who just want to see what the fuss is about. Because of this, I believe that proper context is needed to fully understand how baffling the inclusion of this chapter is. In addition, I want to say that despite the incendiary comments I'm about to make about an admittedly small but significant part of the game, I did enjoy the game and would recommend it if you can afford it. Right. Final Fantasy XV is an open-world JRPG with revamped combat that ditches the turn-based system that has been synonymous with the series since its inception. It features side quests, dungeons, and hunts that range from fetching a particular item to killing a certain monster or group of monsters. You play as Noctis, as you visit cities and explore the land to participate in key moments in the story with your 3 companions. There are small bits of linearity that last for short periods of time and exist to serve the story and the dungeons. Chapter 13 is a part of the game focused on a restricted combat system and has stealth sections. It features bland corridors, simplistic puzzles, and enemies appearing before you in frequent succession. Your objective is to find a MacGuffin while being separated from your companions most of the time. The entire chapter from beginning to end serves the story exclusively and lasts for about 2 hours. I contrasted this chapter's content with the rest of the experience because I want to highlight how small this section is when looking at the bigger picture. The game took me over 40 hours to complete, so I'm not talking about a single percentage, and while the game is separated into chapters, it doesn't force you to complete them. When the game leaves its primary continent in Chapter 9, and essentially leads you down a corridor until the game's conclusion, it gives you the option to return to the primary continent solely for the purposes of exploration. It's like hitting the pause button in terms of story, so you can complete the rest of the side quests you want. You can even do it before the final boss fight. The reason why Chapter 13 is so infamous is because it grinds against the conventions and rules the game established, and you're unable to leave this section to return to the open world. In other words, it takes away your freedom of choice. It's an easy analogy of what is wrong, but it's too simplistic of an explanation to really understand what bogs this chapter down, and why 2 hours affected my overall mood so much. However, now that you have a frame of reference, let me tell you what is wrong with this level in detail.
The time has come.
Chapter 13 takes place inside Niflheim's capital city, where a plot vital crystal resides. It resides in an entirely different country on a different continent that's more technologically advanced in general, and has a completely different climate. It's unfamiliar territory, and the facility holding the crystal is the setting for the entire chapter, barring one quick sequence at the start. While it can be difficult to get much variety out of one setting with a particular aesthetic, in this case a mechanical fortress that resembles a factory or laboratory more than a fortress, it could be argued that given how open the series has been with its approach to environments, that the design team could have experimented a little with the appearance of this level. For those who have played the game, what was your favourite part of Chapter 13? The green-grey entrance, the grey corridor, or the other grey corridors? There are exceptions when the art does take interesting turns in its presentation, but the vast majority of the chapter takes place within a very limited colour palette, more reminiscent of some of the most unremarkable shooters of the last generation. It's a shame that the very talented artists involved, from the character design, to the effects, to the environmental design of even some of the most brief areas of the game, were unable to bring their A-game when it came to one of the game's most crucial parts. There's a great game that was open with its environmental design, despite its limited setting, and that's Spec Ops: The Line. Get used to me coming back to this game, by the way. The setting is Dubai after its destruction from massive sandstorms, yet was able to include very vivid environments and styles within this setting and base colour palette. Granted, it doesn't span the entire game, but Chapter 13 takes 1/3 of Spec Ops' runtime to complete. It's not like Spec Ops was a 20-hour epic. What doesn't help is the fact that the vast majority of the time is spent in these narrow corridors, which is an unwelcome contrast to the more wide-open mazes that the rest of Final Fantasy XV was. Even the more linear sections of this game felt plausible, with Rock of Ravato being a highlight to how well you can disguise linearity. In Chapter 13, a supposedly high-technology research centre, whose experiments include merging demons with whatever the Empire can find, has some of the most inconvenient architecture I have ever seen, mirroring what made a majority of Final Fantasy XIII such a chore. In fact, the general level design feels like a rejected Final Fantasy XIII chapter, and considering this game's origins as being part of the 13 name, it wouldn't surprise me if it was straight up lifted from that game. Level design like this would have been fine if it was shorter and took place at the beginning of the game, because it would make your arrival in the open world more satisfying, but because it's the basis of an entire chapter and lasts for 2 hours, its inclusion sticks out much more. You can't escape this chapter and come back to it later. You are forced to go through it before you can return to the open world, the world you want to be in a lot more than this tiny grey cage. Which leads me to the level's major gimmick, part of which I will come back to later. Before the chapter starts, you lose one of your companions after a climactic action sequence, and at the start of the chapter itself, you lose the other two due to a train literally blocking their path. You are separated, and you are unable to access your weapons or magic due to a device you encounter near the tail end. But you are not without a method of fighting. Shortly after the separation, Noctis puts on a plot-critical item and is able to utilize some limited magical ability. By equipping it, you can use a devastating spell that tanks your MP, a lifesteal spell which is handy when you are on low health, and a buffed up dodge ability that can damage nearby enemies if successful. In theory, they should be useful spells, and they are for a little while, but the critical flaw is that they are not fun to use due to 3 things. 1, its usefulness is very limited, because shortly after, you get a royal arm that is not only more useful, but is more fun to use. If marginally, but that's more down to the enemy encounters. The most useful spell there is the lifesteal spell, but in order to use it, you need to stand completely still as you cast it. Which leads me into the second problem, the lack of impact. The devastating if unclear spell is certainly something to behold, and was interesting to watch, but with it being only one of 3 spells, it got old fairly quickly. Fact is that the magic is not fun to use and feels fairly flaccid. Admittedly, I didn't use magic that much in the base game, since crafting them felt a bit arduous, but when I did cast magic, it felt like I was bending the heavens to my will. They sounded impactful, they looked pretty, and had lasting effects to the nearby environment. Third and finally, the spells feel like introductory spells in usefulness and design. Lack of impact and no real reason to use it after this chapter makes the magic you gained feel like temporary gimmicks. Introduced, but no real reason to use it again, especially since the 14th and final chapter is only an hour or so long. It's a system that tried to make use out of a major plot element from this game and the movie tie-in, but the lack of time or care resulted in wasted gameplay mechanics. It's not like the swordplay is that much more engaging either. As a limited version of the core combat mechanics, it's serviceable, but it's once again hampered by the narrow corridors and lack of variety. It makes combat encounters much more exhausting, and since you cannot use the exploding dodge spell unless you re-equip the ring, the exciting action that was around in the previous chapters becomes tiring. Each encounter is clockwork. Again, this lasts for a majority of the chapter. Here's a wise design decision. Stealth sections with gaps in the wall to hide in. How about the frequent doors that take an age to open? How about keycard hunting and a power puzzle? What about the jump scares? How about a cutscene made for the explicit purpose to tell you that the grinding chapter isn't going to end anytime soon, with Darren DePaul mocking you for thinking otherwise?
The higher you climb, the further you fall.
The pacing is agonizing here. I think about 45 minutes of the game were spent hunting keycards and waiting for these doors to open. I know they're not literal keycards, but they function the same way. Go to a point, press X, you are now able to open these doors. They don't even stay open after you use them. They automatically close, and if you want to go back through, you have to go through the agonizingly slow animation again. Is it really that hard just to have the door instantly open when you near it? Maybe have the animation be restricted to doors that require higher clearance? That way we would at least feel like we are progressing from one section to another. And you know, I don't think anyone would have minded the chapter and its baffling design decisions if there was a way to go back to the open world. The game has plenty of content through the side quests and hunts, so if we get to a point in the chapter where we feel tired due to game design, we can remedy that without quitting the software. But you can't, despite these frequent save points. When you get your companions back, the ability to go back to the open world also returns a short time later, but by then you will have made it most of the way through. Too late to avoid the stress caused by playing this level. Final Fantasy XV's story is alright in general. It's fairly straightforward compared to other Final Fantasy games, and is engaging enough that I can understand character motivations and arcs. I thought the villain was well done, and a welcome change to what the series normally classes as villains and final bosses. It does come with a caveat though, because while I understood the purpose of Chapter 13, and can get behind the story points, the actual construction of the narrative in this chapter is shoddy. At best. It's poorly put together, at times confusing, and by the end lacks a satisfying payoff to potential plot threads. Both little and large details are poorly structured, so a lot of the major reveals of the game feel very minor in execution, which is bad because Final Fantasy is renowned for having some of the most well-executed plot twists in gaming. Even Final Fantasy XIII had a decent twist, even if it didn't make much sense when you start thinking about it. We'll get to 15's twists in a moment, but first, I want to talk about the little details. The major gimmick of this level was the stripped down gameplay and level design. Large areas swapped for corridors, companions missing, weapons limited to 2, and the lack of magic is established fairly early into the chapter when you have to escape a train and goes back to normal after destroying the suppressor found after rescuing Prompto. The lack of magic has a huge knock-on effect, because all of Noctis's weapons require magic to access them, even if they don't have any magical properties. This does give the game a neat aesthetic when changing weapons. It makes the possibility of carrying a limitless amount of weapons more plausible when you acknowledge that they're stored in a different plane of existence. I really appreciated it when they reinforced this gameplay element in the cutscenes when you get the royal arms. It shows that the universe we explore has been fully thought out to the littlest of detail. It's a very small point, one that can be easily ignored, but it adds to the world. and it also presents a specific problem in Chapter 13. About an hour after starting the chapter, you fall and you are given one of the Royal Arms, a set of collectible weapons that are pivotal to the plot. This, in effect, gives you a combat style that is more tolerable, but then the cutscene not only shows the sword having a magical aura around it, but it shows the other royal arms you have collected throughout your trip. So not only is this chapter disregarding its own well-established rule for the chapter, it is unintentionally taunting us by showing these cool weapons that we collected, but do not have access to. Now one could say that maybe the magic suppression field is selective in what magic is or isn't available, and funnily enough, I agree. The reason is because the enemies you fight in this facility have some demon essence in them, whether it is through the guards or demons literally coming from the ground. The ring itself is linked to the crystal, which, as we soon see, is powerful enough to drag Noctis in its opening and House Bahamut. In addition, the colour scheme and properties of the spells themselves make it much easier to lower my bar of immersion, because they feel like we are using forbidden magic, but when the cutscenes contradicts the gameplay, that's when I have a problem. I actually thought I had access to these weapons, like acquiring the sword somehow broke down a barrier the suppression field built. This rule breaking isn't limited to the cutscenes, it's also reflected in the gameplay. So I can dodge and get surrounded by a magical aura. Okay, right, fine, I can buy that due to the cutscene of Noctis putting the ring on, but I can't access my inventory of weapons that my sword is somehow able to enter and exit. The same goes to consumables. How come I can access my potions but not my weapons? It's not like I need them, since the ring provides me with a way to heal and effectively dodge. You can even buy them from vending machines, so if the suppression field was restricted to weapons, why not make that abundantly clear? It's an inconsistent plot point. Couple of things I would change. Number 1, use the ring as a way to address the lack of inventory selection. Considering this is an extremely important facility, holding something that the Emperor wanted so badly that he invaded a country to get it, you would think that a technologically advanced nation would have automated defenses in this facility. You could have Noctis gunned down by automated defenses and try to use a potion or Phoenix down. It becomes clear that he can't get them, the ring calls out to him more and more until he puts it on. It could have a shockwave effect that could disable the automated defenses, thus reinforcing the ring's power. Number 2, make Noctis hold the weapon instead of hiding it. With combats limited to just the ring and sword, you could have Noctis put the weapon on his back or continue holding it until the suppression field is down. Everywhere he goes, he keeps hold of it, and when the suppression field is down, it can join the other royal arms in the inventory dimension. I know it's a very minor detail to complain about, but it adds on top of the problems this chapter has, like the pacing issues, but I've already covered that in the previous section. Although what Arden says before you fall feels like the writers wanted to give us a middle finger for wanting to leave. It's like dangling a carrot on a string before suddenly yanking it away when we get near it. I know it's Arden messing with Noctis' head and that's the purpose of his taunts, but it would have been more effective if Arden personally caused the fall, or not be heard at all given the major twist at the end of the chapter. Might not work, but it would have been less insulting than what we got. What's much more of a glaring problem is how this game handles the companions, and my complaint isn't that your companions aren't with you. In some of the best RPGs I have played, there are sections of the story where the playable character is completely cut off from support. It can give the main character a chance to show the audience what they are like when they are on their own. More specifically, how vulnerable they are without that support. Going back to the Spec Ops The Line example, the lack of companions at the game's end just highlights how far Captain Walker has fallen mentally. The way Final Fantasy XV does it in the case of Chapter 13 is in a way that feels very haphazard. Admittedly, the separation of Noctis and his friend starts off decent, with Prompter getting knocked off the train because it A, solidified Arden's character as a manipulative, bitter man with abilities beyond our understanding, B, executed at the right time when tensions are increasing within the group, and C, every other time we were separated it was voluntary, or safe within the knowledge that they were close by, as was the case with the fights with Titan and Leviathan. Separating Gladio and Ignis from Noctis was something that was going to happen after Prompter was thrown off the train, but I didn't think it would have been in a moment with little impact. Sure, it's a huge train separating them, but the event occurs too quickly, and and there isn't enough time to absorb what has happened. It was like the writers and designers realised they needed a way to get Noctis on his own, and so came up with something that wouldn't take much time to complete. I would have been fine with an explosion separating the two, then the train coming down, for you could have some build-up. Have an aircraft or a missile head towards the three, and have Gladio and Ignis get blasted one way, and Noctis in the other. After all those strikes your car took while entering the city only totaled it, and would have been a smart move for the military to ensure the intruder was completely dealt with before leaving. Noctis would go on alone as planned, before somehow encountering them in one of the most contrived sequences I have seen in an RPG. After what feels like an eternity of going through corridors and monotonous combat encounters, you come across a corridor that has a defense system. You fall into the trap that Ardent ensures you are aware of.
In case there was any doubt, it's a trap.
But since there's no other place to go, you have to. It's something you have to deal with. You are nearly killed when suddenly, Ignis and Gladio suddenly appear and rescue you by shutting down the defense system. All that's explained is that they received help from Arden, and that's it. It doesn't go into any detail, and we are left in the dark. I can understand Ignis being unable to explain what's happened, but Gladio was in a position to explain how they got here. This wouldn't have been as bad if there wasn't also these save points scattered around the facility. Each time you go and rest at one of these save points in the base game, the game skips to the next morning, so if you saved a lot while you were here, then you could have spent several in-game days going through these corridors. This doesn't get explained. There's no comment on how it could have taken literal days to reunite. One line or two about how long it took would have satisfied this nitpick. Oh, and they rescue Prompter shortly afterwards. And it turns out Prompter is a mechanical being made by the Empire. Now, I'm all for twists in video games, especially since they add additional intrigue or recontextualize the narrative in a meaningful way, but here's the thing. Twists are either foreshadowed or hinted throughout the story, and their execution relies on noticing these hints when it's revealed to us. Sixth Sense is a popular example, but take a look at Call of Duty Black Ops for a good twist. The dialogue was written to take into account Mason talking to himself, while having small sections throughout that portray as if Reznov was seen by your allies and enemies. Without the foreshadowing, it's just a sudden slap in the face by a stranger. No reason, just pain and confusion. Prompter's twist is a plot convenience. It's a way to open the door to the next room while trying to make it meaningful. He has a few moments where he is sad and a little bitter at revealing his true self, but it has no impact on his character. It's not even foreshadowed in a meaningful way, and if it was hinted at some point, then the sheer scale of the game, on top of the frustrations this chapter has caused, would have distracted us from those hints. In the end, if there was a keycard next to Prompter that unlocked the room containing the suppression controls, then it would have made no meaningful difference. I hope this gets expanded on in some way come the update, so the twist might hold some weight long after this video comes out. Another thing that could do with some work is your encounter with the Emperor, and no, I'm not talking about when you encounter Arden by the crystal. I'm talking about the Emperor you get a glimpse of at the start. You see him in a cutscene that features characters you encounter throughout the game. One of them you fight in Chapter 13 itself. Considering the Emperor's character design, and the fact that he is the Emperor of the faction that has caused you so much trouble since the start of the game, you would think that there would be some sort of confrontation, even if they aren't the main villain. In Final Fantasy VI, you encounter Emperor Gestal a few times, even though he's not the villain of the game. It's not that I'm demanding a confrontational scene in Final Fantasy XV, it's just what we're conditioned to expect when given a scene like this at the start of the game. Yes, there are games where a cutscene of people meeting and talking to each other doesn't lead to some encounter, but the key difference between Final Fantasy XV and Deus Ex Human Revolution is that the Empire is firmly established when the cutscene occurs, while Human Revolution's meeting is the first thing we see when we start playing. The purpose of the scene was to invite intrigue, not establish characters. So after watching this cutscene in a vacuum, what do you expect when you finally meet the Emperor? Do you expect a slow build to lead into more questions a la Bioshock Infinite? Do you expect a slow reveal through clever cinematography and music a la Lair of the Shadow Broker? Do you expect a twist that recontextualizes the narrative a la Spec Ops: The Line and Mass Effect? Or do you expect something more tragic like in Dark Souls? Did you expect this? Believe it or not, this monster is in fact the Emperor himself, though now transformed into a demon. The fact that this is the Emperor is not revealed until after you reunite with your companions, and that is due to the monster inexplicably gaining the ability to speak. It's a weak reveal, there's no emotion or soundtrack in the first encounter. Instead, it is awfully quiet. The character is one note when he does speak, and even then it is spouting out lines from a stock villain lines library, all about the self and damn everyone else. This is the only form of the Emperor you will encounter, so any chance to expand the story or any possibility to humanize this man is thrown out the door in favor of explaining why this monster is special. There isn't even a cutscene after the monster is defeated, nor is it the final boss of the chapter. So what would I do with him? Well, one of the weirder things I saw in this chapter was a fairly detailed throne room and a conference room, but not utilized in a way that it should have. You could have the Emperor in his human form slumped on the throne, thoroughly defeated as it's become clear that he is no longer in control of his nation, manipulated by the far more powerful Arden. Noctis and the Emperor could talk, giving the old man a chance to develop as a character before being transformed into a boss fight. The throne room is certainly designed to accommodate a boss fight, and upon reflection it looks like that was the case before the team ran out of time or money. The same encounter, minus the monster transformation and the fight entirely, could be best utilized in the Crystal Room. The Emperor could be gazing hypnotically at the majestic sight, and as Noctis is sucked in, Arden could reveal his intentions and power of immortality, before throwing him over the edge to his death, thus solidifying his position. It's certainly cliché, but sometimes cliché is good, and Final Fantasy loves to call back to previous games. So now hopefully you understand my position on why this chapter is so reviled. The gameplay is a sharp departure for the worse from the rest of the game, the pacing is agonizingly slow, the narrative is broken both on its own and in its relation to gameplay, and there are missed opportunities to develop the story in interesting and meaningful ways. While I could stop the video here, there is one more point I want to address: the chapter's reception.
The time has come.
I don't like being a complete dick since I know it's just going to hurt people, but in the case of this point, I'm going to have to point to an admittedly small group of people and tell them that their opinion is wrong. The only reason I can see for not changing Chapter 13 is for prosperity's sake. While I think it's important to fix mistakes in the same way Mass Effect 3 did through a free expansion and the Leviathan DLC, I also believe that the original copy should be preserved. Fortunately, it looks like the fix director Hajime Tabata will implement won't erase the data on the disc, so we'll have an opportunity to look back what this awful chapter was. And then there's my opinion on Chapter 13's defensive point that's been circulating since the announcement regarding the changes Square Enix would be implementing to make the level a more complete and fulfilling experience. The most notable defender is Julie Munsey from Wired magazine, who wrote an article called "Please Don't Take Final Fantasy XV's Worst Level Away From Us." In it, she explains that while the chapter is an oddity from the rest of the game for some of the same reasons I stated earlier, the shift, to quote, works so well as a self-contained emotional unit. A little later she says that good art doesn't have to be satisfying, and that even if it was a complete accident, Chapter 13 was an inclusion that pushed the player to the lowest emotional point in the game, and as such, was successful. She is right to some degree. Games don't have to feel good for them to be great. If you play Spec Ops: The Line, you could be mistaken for it being a run-of-the-mill shooter. It's mechanically unsatisfying, but it works because it helps build up the sucker punches in a way that has yet to be matched. By the end of the game, you are exhausted, and you want the game to end, which was why the choice to surrender your weapon is widely regarded as the most popular ending you can get. In the case of Chapter 13, on paper the tone makes perfect sense. You are on an adventure, and there comes a point where the character is at their lowest point, before overcoming their obstacle and coming out on top. You can find this sort of narrative structure in The Matrix, Alien, Interstellar, no seriously, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and, funnily enough, Spec Ops: The Line. So Chapter 13 should have been suited to Final Fantasy 15. The heroes are at their lowest point, the tone gets darker, and Noctis has to push forward to overcome the obstacles ahead of him. But here's the thing. The reason why Chapter 13 doesn't work, whereas all those other pieces of media do, is because it breaks their own established rules to achieve this tone. The Matrix presents the One as this great person with infinite possibilities and is teased throughout the film, and while the next films take it to the extreme, when Neo comes back to life it doesn't feel that jarring. In the world of video games, the reason why Spec Ops: The Line can get away with its more surreal elements, with the lowest point being when Captain Walker starts seeing nightmarish alternatives to the present world, is because it is clear that his mentality is breaking down as the game goes on. The way we play the game stays the same, it is mechanically unchanged, and progression is achieved in the same way as it always had throughout the game. Compare that with Chapter 13, where the pacing slows to a crawl and the way you play the game is artificially limited by the developers. The linearity would have been fine because we've had instances of linearity, both through main and optional quests, but jump scares? Slower combat? Flaccid moments at key story points? The chapter's construction feels like it was crafted by a different team entirely, then pushed in at the last minute. Now, one could say that this was the intention, quoting Tabata that the level was deliberately designed that way. Well, just because it was included intentionally doesn't make the chapter any less horribly executed. Remember when emotional moments and pivotal points in the narrative had a sense of grandness? The cutscenes would be wonderfully animated, the music conveys the appropriate emotion, the scene's writing shines through in its objective. How can companion separation go from the high production values of this scene to unimpactful execution only 20 minutes or so later? That's what's missing from this chapter. Impactful moments that are consistent with the narrative. Magic ring, Prompter being an artificial creation, the Emperor appearing to Noctis for the first time as a monster, feels dissonant from the main game in comparison to Leviathan summoning, previous encounters with Arden, and pulling a broken down car along the road. Here's a word that shouldn't be associated with games, but perfectly encapsulates this chapter. Stressful. And this isn't a word I use lightly to describe a game, yet alone a small but significant section of one. Spec Ops: The Line was not a fun game, but it wasn't a stressful game to complete. Dark Souls is a challenging game that might not be fun at times, but it's not stressful. You know what is stressful? No Man's Sky, Sonic Boom, Steel Battalion Heavy Armor, and Kane and Lynch 2. We want to be engaged, we want to be challenged, not stressed. We play games not to be stressed. We play for escapism. And who wants to escape into a stressful environment? That's why this chapter needs to be changed, because on top of the corridors that never seem to end, and the inability to go back to the open world to explore, the stress caused by this chapter was nearly enough for me to put down the controller and never pick it up again. If you want any more proof that this chapter needs changes to become good, listen to the audio engineering, more specifically the cutscene that ends the chapter. Try to watch this without subtitles, then come back and tell me that Chapter 13 doesn't need changing, and is fine the way it is.
Please. Help me stop the demons. Why?
Unharmed by the light, the chosen king. Allow me to regale you with a tale. In an age long past, an incurable scourge ravaged mankind. A tiny menace that twisted men into monsters, the likes of which you've seen. In Lucis lived a savior who could cure the afflicted. His body would come to host myriad demons. Countless lives be spared. But a jealous king, one not yet chosen by the crystal, ostracized and demonized this healer of the people, making a true monster of him. I gave you my name earlier, but you should know that it was not a name given to me at birth. Arden Lucis Kylum is my proper name. You'll never guess whose name this Lunia was. No, killing this mortal will bring me swift satisfaction. Playing with the crystal's power, arise as its champion. Only once the crystal and the king are no more, I know redemption. Come back soon. I shall keep your friends company till you are